Chapter 7 of Against Odds by Lawrence L. Lynch. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 7. It was Greenback Bob. Our chief had arranged for us, and in advance of our arrival, that our letters should be received at the bureau, where a desk was always at our disposal, and a little before 4 o'clock I dropped in once more to look for letters, and ask if Dave had made a second appearance. The letters were in waiting for both of us, but there was no news of Dave, and, stowing the letters in my pocket, I sought once more the court of honour, seating myself near the great MacMonnies fountain, in the shade of the administration building, where Dave could not fail to find me, to read my letters and wait for him. I was in no great haste, with that magnificent court spread out before me, and the blue dancing waves of Lake Michigan in the distance, nature's background for the great peristyle, surmounted by that novel and beautiful Columbus quadriga, in itself a work of art such as is seldom seen, and with golden justice, dominant and serene, commanding and overlooking all. Forgetting my letters, I let my eyes wander slowly from point to point of beauty, letting the moments pass unheeded. "Fine figure of a woman, eh?" I started, and came suddenly down to earth at the sound of one of my friend's characteristic speeches. He was standing beside me, as imperturbable of countenance as usual, but looking somewhat blown, and he dropped upon the bench, and stretched his legs, and pulled off his hat, like a weary man who means to enjoy a little well-earned rest. I knew him too well to display any curiosity, and I merely sorted out from the bundle of letters still unopened in my hand those bearing his name, and laid them upon his knee, and with merely a nod and a smile, by way of greeting, addressed myself to my own. The first was a brief business document, the next a schoolboy's letter, short, of course, from a young brother, my sole living tie and charge. The third was from our chief, and I saw, upon opening it, that it was addressed within to both of us. "Dave," I ventured, "may I interrupt?" "You can't," he replied. "I've done. They're of no consequence," and he thrust the two missives I had given him into his loose side pocket. "Blaze away, boy." The letter was not long, and, after some minor instructions and some suggestions, came this passage: "I wonder if either of you remembers the case of the Englishman who wrote us at much length some 6 months ago concerning his son, lost or missing. We did not succeed in finding him in New York." "A small wonder," chuckled Dave, whose memory was a storehouse. "We hadn't even the skeleton of a description." "In New York, you remember," I read on, "and it has seemed to me that you may as well look out for him in your intervals of leisure, if there are such." "Old man's growing sarcastic," grumbled my friend. "It's a good thing, if successful," I continued, "and the Fair is the best place in the world for a hideout. If the young fellow's above ground, I'll wager something he's in Chicago now. That is, if he really did come to America a year ago, as his fond father (interrogatory) writes. I enclose for your further information his letter, and I would be proud of the fact if you two fellows could unearth him at the Columbian City. I give you carte blanche for the case." "Humph! That means roll up your sleeves and go in." I took up the copy of the Englishman's letter. "Shall I read it?" I asked, "or is it—" "Don't say engraven on your memory," implored Dave. "Yes, go ahead." "Dundalk House, January 3rd, 1893. Messrs. Gentlemen, on November 6th in the year 1892, Carroll L. Rae, Esquire, of Dundalk House, left his home, ostensibly for a few days in London. He was never seen again at Dundalk, and we have been accurately informed that he sailed for America in that same month. Being of age, he drew from his bankers while in London £1,000, a full amount deposited to his credit. Since that time No trace of him has been found. Carroll L. Ray is 26 years of age, and tall, lacking 1/2 inch of being 6 feet in height. He is slender, broad-shouldered, upright, fair skin, blue eyes, brown hair, features regular and refined, hair worn very short, but inclined to curl close to skull, strong in athletic sports, a graduate of Queen's College, has small aristocratic feet and hands, a skilled horseman, sings a fine and unusually high tenor, has a singularly strong control over all animals. We have no portrait of him since childhood. Has strong leaning toward military life and somewhat literary tendencies. Am prepared to send blank check for the payment of expenses of thorough search, and add as reward, when found, £2,000. Address all correspondence to Sir Hugo Ray, Dundalk House, Egham, Surrey. "Umph!" broke out Brainerd, when I read the last word. "Typical old English paterfamilias. Tyrannical, I'll be bound. I'll bet something the young fellow ran away from parental tyranny. How did the thing come out at the first attempt? I don't seem to recall it." "And for a very good reason. You were in Canada, and I was occupied with that Rockville murder. I think they put Sturgis on the case. English himself, you know." "Yes. Well?" "Well, as nearly as I remember, Sturgis advertised, to begin, something to his advantage, etc." "Of course," contemptuously. "This failed, and he made the tour of the hotels, swell places first, then going down in the scale, hunted the registers, haunted the places most affected by the English tourist, halted good-looking or English-looking blond young men until they turned on him, in fact, tried all the dodges, and failed." "Of course. It's one thing to find a person who has been hidden, and quite another to search for one who hides himself. What do you think has set the chief to looking this lost son up here, and through us?" "Why, you know his ways. He seldom stops to explain, but I fancy he may have heard again from Sir Hugo Ray." I took up the 2 sheets, and was about to thrust them into their envelope, when Brainerd suddenly said, "Hold on, boy, there's something written across the back of that copied letter." I turned it over, and read the 1/2 lines written thereon. "Carroll Ray, if found, is to be told at once that his brother Sir Hugo is dead." "Oh!" ejaculated Brainerd, "so it's not his father. Well, that alters things. We may be able to find a Sir Carroll Ray, especially as he must have about exhausted that £1,000 if he has been doing the States in true English style. At any rate," I added, "it's on our books. I suppose one may keep an eye out for a swell young Englishman, here as well as elsewhere. It's only one more face in the crowd." "And that reminds me," said my friend, "this business almost put it out of my head. I took a turn on that intramural road this afternoon." "Yes?" I knew better than to interrupt at this point. "And I am sure I saw, whom do you think?" "Dave, that's like a woman. I'm surprised at you. You saw Delbras." "Wrong! I'm certain of it, Greenback Bob." "Good! He was dressed very swell. You might have mistaken him for one of the board of directors, but it was Bob." "And you piped him home, of course?" I queried. "Of course I didn't. He was going one way and I the other, each on an intramural car." "Oh, and you were running to stop the car and Bob, when I saw you at Mount Vernon station," I said wickedly. "Did you overtake it?" "I did, just." "And Bob?" eagerly. "Well," with a grin, "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but when I jumped on board at the last moment, I found that Bob had got off while I got on. In fact, I saw him going downstairs as I was borne away to 57th Street. There, boy, don't look so mournful. It's all in the game. I couldn't find a trace of him, but we know he's here." I had decided on the night of my arrival, after pondering late the adventure of the black bag, or, as I now described it to myself, Miss Jenrys' bag, upon my course of action concerning it. In her letter to her friend, she had mentioned the entrance at 57th Street as being near their place of abode, and I had promised myself that I would be early at that gate to watch for the coming of Miss Jenrys, and to restore her property. What else? I had not counted upon a diamond robbery at the very beginning of my World's Fairs adventures, and as I wished to go unaccompanied, I did not attempt to stand guard at evening. But the second morning saw me at an early hour alone, and so near the gate at 57th Street that I could in no possible way miss the lady should she appear. I had not needed to avoid Dave. He had been prompt to tell me that he meant to put in the day looking for Greenback Bob, and that he should do his looking upon Midway. And why Midway? I had asked him. Because if there's a place that is better than all other places in which to hide oneself, that place is Midway. It was quite true, and as I made my way toward the northern entrance, I turned over in my mind an idea suggested, or revived, by Dave's last words. As I passed toward the entrance between the unique little house of South Dakota on one side, and hospitable and homelike Nebraska State Building on the other, my gaze was caught by the restfulness and charm of the western facade of the latter, with its broad portico, and the little lawn lying between the broad steps facing the western boundary of the grounds, the little stream flowing under overhanging trees of nature's own planting, and past the little natural arbour of climbing vines draping themselves among the branches, making shade and coolness for the groups loitering underneath upon the rustic seats scattered freely and inviting all. While I gazed, a voice close behind me said in a wheedling drawl, "Do come in. We never saw sich a place. Why, upstairs beats this all out of sight. Sech parlours, with velvet chairs, and sofys, and a pianner. I tell ye Nebrasky beats some of them stuck-up Eastern States." I turned to see a fat, rosy-faced, and eager woman, in the defiant bonnet I have learned to know as from out West, piloting a lean and reluctant woman, quite as typical as a rural New Englander, through the gate of the enclosure, and, prompted doubtless by the words I had just heard, I took another and more extended survey of the building so justly extolled, this time lifting my eyes to the upper window and the balcony overhanging the stream. Was it a mere passing resemblance, or a fancied one, or was the face I saw for just an instant at one of those upper windows the face of the little brunette adventuress who had laid claim to Miss Jenrys's bag? If so, she had been scanning the increasing crowd through an opera glass, and had dropped this in seeming haste, and vanished before I could prolong my glance. It's hardly likely, I said to myself, and turned toward the bridge spanning the little stream, and lying between me and the entrance I sought. As I stepped upon the bridge, I saw, on the other side, just coming out from the shadow of the elevated tracks above the entrance, the lithe form and rare blonde face, not to be mistaken anywhere, with its fine clear contour, its dark eyes, and fine healthful pallor. She came forward leisurely and stopped by the railing at the edge of the platform to look down at the white-hooded Laplander, who constantly paddled up and down in the little stream between the bridge and the Lapland village behind the enclosure, a few rods to the north. Just then there was a cry from beyond the gates, followed by the rat-tat-tat of a drum, and one of those perpetually arriving processions came filing down the platform and across the bridge. I was in no haste to accost Miss Jenrys at the very entrance, and possibly in the face of one or more of my ever-present brethren of the watchful eye, and so, while she waited unhurried upon one side of the bridge, I stopped also, looking down upon the little stream, and feigning interest in the white-robed canoeist, paddling, and doubtless perspiring, in the mild June air. The procession was not a long one, and was formed of boys half grown and wholly effervescent, wearing what was evidently an extemporized uniform, and carrying a banner which informed me that it was a boys' school, sent from an outlying town through the liberality of an honourable somebody, whose name I did not hear. for the fact of the sending was not emblazoned upon the red silk banner they carried, but was announced, often and willingly, in reply to numerous queries all along the line. They were a healthy and wholesome lot of fellows, and while I gazed at them, not without a feeling of interest in and sympathy with their day's pleasure, a little figure flitted past me, through the tiniest of spaces between the marching lads and myself, pressed close against the rail, and I saw again the little brunette hastening toward the platform at the gate. Wondering a little, I kept my post. There was the usual rabble of all sorts and conditions swelling the ranks in the rear, and when these had crowded across the bridge, there was another throng of more leisurely moving visitors. But Miss Jenrys was not in the throng, and when they had passed and the stream of travel had somewhat thinned, I moved forward, only a few steps, however, for just beyond me, advancing slowly, with a smile upon her lips and her eyes turned toward a companion, came Miss Jenrys. She had entered the grounds alone, of that I had been ocularly convinced, and that she should find a companion so soon had never entered my thoughts. But she had a companion, and I almost gnashed my teeth as I saw tripping along at her side the little brunette. She was talking volubly, in the low, quiet manner that I knew, and if she saw me in passing, she disguised the fact skilfully. I waited until they were a few paces ahead, and then followed them slowly, chewing the cud of bitter reflection. Could it be that I was losing my skill in reading and judging faces, I, upon whom the men of our force relied for a rapid and usually correct guess at a strange face? Was I mistaken in this little brunette, then, or had I been mistaken in my judgment of Miss Jenrys? No, never. I had set her down at once for a lady, in a sweet old-fashioned meaning of the word, womanly, refined, good, and true, and had not her letters confirmed this? But this dark-haired, quick-speaking little person by her side, was she, after all, a friend? And had I committed a faux pas in refusing to deliver up the little bag? And if so, had I the courage to approach these two and commit myself? Could I tell Miss Jenrys how, failing to think of a better way of finding her, I had read her letters? I had meant, of course, to do this, but could I, with those pert, mocking eyes upon me? No, in my heart I knew that it was not that which vexed me. Could I bear the scrutiny of those clear, straightforward brown eyes in that other presence, which would put me at so sore a disadvantage? Then I shook myself and my senses together. After all, she came alone. Might they not separate soon? How could I tell that there was not a friend, several friends perhaps, waiting for that troublesome brunette back in the Nebraska Building? They were walking straight down the street toward the lake, with a row of state buildings upon one side, and the great spreading art gallery on the other. It was a perfect June morning, and the sight of the blue lake at the end of that splendid promenade, with the fresh breeze blowing off it, was inspiriting. There was to be some state function that day, and the crowd was thickening. Made bold by numbers, I came close behind them. Miss Jenrys had unfurled a big blue umbrella, and the two walked in the shade of it. And in order to screen myself, in part at least, should the brunette, whom I was beginning to detest heartily, turn and look suddenly back, I shook out the closely rolled folds of my own umbrella, and poised it carefully between my face and the sun. And now, made bold by my canopy, and frankly bent upon hearing what I could, I drew daringly near, and when they stopped and stood to gaze at the ornate New York State Building, I halted also. "By no means," I heard the soft voice of the lovely blonde say, as she moved back a pace to look up at the façade. "That would be quite too enterprising. I am chaperoned by my aunt, who is not so good a sightseer as myself, and for 2 days I have ventured." Here the sharp call of some hurrying chair–boys drowned her words, and I next heard the brunette's voice. Things do happen so strangely. It was impossible to catch all of her words. "Mamma is sick so often, and papa. I do dislike being alone, though. In the art gallery, acquaintances, that is all I do wish." They moved on, Miss Jenrys increasing her speed perceptibly, and seeking, it seemed to me, to walk a little aloof from her companion, which caused me to wonder if she could be expecting or hoping to meet anyone. I was no longer able to hear their conversation, but they again paused and gazed long at the fine colonial building of the State of Massachusetts. I had hardly looked to see Miss Jenrys enter the placid New York halls, but when she turned away from Massachusetts without entering or so much as climbing the terrace steps, I wondered. And then, as the pair turned away, and after a moment of seeming hesitation moved on toward the lake, a man, tall and well dressed, passed me so closely and at such a rapid pace as to attract my attention to himself. He walked well, with a quick swinging stride, and I think I never saw a man's clothes fit better. His hands were gloved, and in one of them he carried a natty umbrella, using it as a cane. I had not seen his face, for he turned it neither to right nor left, and his splendid disregard for the beauties all about him was explained when I saw him halt beside Miss Jenrys, and hold out a hand with the assured air of an old friend. I was near enough to see the smile on her face when she turned to greet him, but the few quick words they exchanged were of course unheard. Then I saw her turn toward the brunette on the other side, but that brisk little person had already drawn back, and now she said a word or two, nodded airily, and, turning, went quickly away. A moment later Miss Jenrys and her companion turned about and went toward the Massachusetts Building, and I saw his face. It was dark and handsome, and as they mounted the terrace side by side, I pressed boldly forward, under the shadow of my umbrella, and thanking my lucky stars that I had it with me, and that, because it was on the cards that at 10 o'clock I was to go to the rendezvous where Farmer Camp was to meet or await Mr. Smug, for he knew him by no other name, I was lightly but sufficiently disguised in a wig slightly sprinkled with grey, and long about my neck and ears, and a very respectable looking short and light set of moustaches and whiskers, the whole finished with a pair of gold rimmed glasses. Wearing these, I ventured so close that I heard, while toiling behind them up the broad old fashioned stairway, a few fragmentary words from the lips of Miss Jenrys, who seemed replying to some question. "I cannot indeed. The best of reasons. My aunt is not here, Mr. Voisin." "Mr. Voisin!" I fell back and meditated. So this was the handsome Frenchman, the rival of him. I did not again attempt to overhear their conversation, but I followed them about the building as they moved slowly from room to room, and now I did not follow with my eyes upon the graceful and stately movements, and lovely profiles and turns of the head, of the fair woman moving on before me, but I noted carefully every gesture, every pose and turn, the gait, carriage, and as correctly as possible the height, weight, and length of limb of Mr. Maurice Voisin of France, and I felt that I was doing well. When at last they turned from the building, which neither had seemed in haste to leave, I looked at my watch, and knew that I had barely time to reach the southern end of the grounds, even aided by the intramural. As I came out upon the street once more, and was passing hurriedly by the eastern portico of the New York Building, I chanced to lift my eyes toward it. The great curtains between the fluted columns were swaying in the breeze, and from between two, which she seemed to be trying to hold together with unsteady hands, the face of the little brunette, dark and frowning, looked cautiously out. Chapter 7